So, if you think of zombie horror productions, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Well, it might be a bloody, creepy TV show like The Walking Dead, or a horror classic like Night of the Living Dead, but there are actually also some zombie horror productions that are not creepy at all, but very funny instead. And one of those movies is Shaun of the Dead. This film was released in cinemas in 2004 and was an immediate huge success. Not just in Europe, where it was filmed, but also in the USA and worldwide. Shaun of the Dead tells the story of Shaun and his friend Ed, who are surprised by the zombie apocalypse and then somehow try to save Shaun's girlfriend Liz and his mother Barbara. This film is, in a way, a parody of all the great zombie horror films, especially Dawn of the Dead, but it doesn't just make fun of it. Rather, it is an entertaining homage with lots of illusions and its own exciting story. This funny horror movie, with its typical British humor, was shot in London, the place I am right now. So I think it's time for another movie location tour, and I think I also found the Winchester. Let's go. Start our little shooting location tour in a residential area in the northern part of London. This is the place where Shaun lives, and this is also the place where a very iconic one-shot scene was filmed. Shaun walks out of his house, he walks into a corner shop and buys some ice cream, and then he walks back. Yeah, all of that was filmed somewhere in this residential neighborhood. Let's try to find those scenes. Yeah, and this is one of the first scenes that we can see in the movie Shaun of the Dead. The camera pans to the left across the street in this residential area, and this is what the neighborhood looks like today, 20 years later. The proof that we are at the right place here is the street sign on the right, Weston Park, which is still here today, although it's a bit overgrown with ivy and there is a rubbish bin in front of it. Otherwise, not that much has changed in this neighborhood over the past 20 years. It's still the same normal, maybe even a bit dreary residential area. We see that the road markings have apparently changed a bit here and there. We also see that something has changed here and there in the infrastructure. For example, these distribution boxes that we can see here in the film, they look a little different today. The tree that we can see behind the wall on the right in the film has become much larger, but otherwise this area still looks the same as it did in the film. The camera pans further to the left, and here we have another wonderful view of this street and also of the many small, cute British houses that are on the left and on the right side of the street. I think that's so typical Great Britain, isn't it? The houses always have those small porches with windows in it, and they are all lined up. The chimneys are all the same. Yeah, that was the case in the film 20 years ago, and that's still the case today. And now the time has come. Now Shaun makes his big appearance. He comes through the gate of his apartment and walks down the street. His apartment, as you may remember, is absolutely chaotic. There are beer cans and chips everywhere, and especially his friend Ed lies around there all the time. Yeah, and we can also see that in the movie in front of the house, there is a lot of rubbish lying around there on the left side. In reality, this entrance area of the house is definitely not as chaotic as in the movie. It's just a normal house entrance. And what we can also see is the gate that Shaun goes through doesn't exist exist in this form anymore. These bollards you can see on the left and on the right side are obviously much larger today than they were back then. And the gate today is a big black door. However, if we look at the background behind Shaun, we can clearly see this was the house that was shown in the movie. We see a white window on the left and a red door on the right. The red door is no longer here today. It's now dark blue and the window has obviously been renovated. There isn't much left of Shaun's old chaotic shack, but maybe that's a good thing. Here's the scene from another perspective. Shaun steps out of his house and then he meets the teenage boy who's always playing football in the street and who really annoys Shaun. And here we can see again, yes, this little door and the bollards around it have changed a bit. What's really interesting, this grill that we can see behind Shaun is installed over the wall today. Maybe it was already there back then and they just tore it down to make this entrance area look more chaotic. Yeah, today it definitely looks much better. Shaun walks across the street and then he meets a homeless man on the corner. He gives him a few pennies and that was filmed from over here. We can see that the hedge that is also shown in the film is a little better trimmed today than it was back then. Shaun walks across the street, then almost gets hit by a car and then makes his way to a small shop on the left side of the road. That was filmed from over here. And here we can see, yes, it's still the familiar district that we saw in the film 20 years ago. The buildings with the shops on the left side are still there. The shops have changed a bit, I think. You can see some different colors over there. And obviously, in the past 20 years, the UK has also introduced new road markings or something. Take a look here on the road. There are different markings that weren't here 20 years ago. For example, this yellow line on the right, which probably means that you're not allowed to park or stop there. And also those traffic signs that we can see in the movie look completely different today, 20 years later. Then Shaun walks past this apartment building that looks like this in the film and looks like this today, 20 years later. The house itself hasn't changed much. The door, the window, it's all still here, but this wall in front of the house has changed. It's now a brick wall and was obviously renovated in the past 20 years. Shaun walks by some creepy people who already look like zombies, even though they aren't at this point in the film. Like, for example, this good old gentleman with his garbage on the left side. In this scene we can see that the wall on the left side has changed a little bit. And there was also some kind of a wall in between those commercial buildings over here, which apparently was also removed. And well, also the shops in the background obviously have changed over the past 20 years. And then Shaun finally goes into the little grocery store on the side of the road. And guess what? Yes, this grocery store is still here today. It's not entirely clear if this store was also a Londis store back then, but probably it was because the logo above the shop seems very old to me. If I'm right, the Londis stores today have a green logo and look completely different. So maybe this was the same old shop 20 years ago in the movie. An interesting fun fact about this scene, some film freaks might already know that, Shaun buys a Cornetto ice cream in this shop, Cornetto strawberry for his friend Ed, and that's some kind of a running gag that crops up again and again in the sequels to this film by Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright. After Shaun of the Dead, there was the film Hot Fuzz, in which one protagonist also brings the other one a Cornetto ice cream, this time the classic Cornetto brand, and in the third film, The World's End, a mint chocolate Cornetto plays a role. I don't know how much money this company spent on product placement. However, this film trilogy today by fans is also called the Cornetto trilogy. Yeah, and with that, our one shot is coming to an end. Shaun walks back to his apartment. He walks past this house, which we didn't see in the first scene. A house with a red door that is now dark gray. There is a zombie in front of it, which fortunately is no longer here today. Instead, there is an e-scooter on the doorstep today, an invention that simply didn't exist 20 years ago. Yeah, and then Shaun walks towards his apartment again and he meets the homeless man on the street corner again, but this time he is a zombie. That was filmed from over here. And I would say with that we have seen everything we wanted to see in this residential area. It's time to move on to our next filming location. The next place on our list is the place where Liz lives. You might remember she lives in a huge residential building and Shaun comes to rescue her. And all of that happens in this residential neighborhood right behind me. And this is it, Liz's house as we know it from the film. And this is what it looks like today in reality 20 years later. And we see it's a little bit grubbier, isn't it? Although we also see in the film that this house has some green spots or something on it. It doesn't look as bad in the film because the color grading is much colder, it's much bluer. But yeah, in reality, it's quite noticeable, so maybe they should clean this house someday. This, by the way, is the Cunningham house, which is part of a block of flats with different residential units. All of these houses have specific names, and this one is called the Cunningham house. It's really quiet here. You have a beautiful green meadow right in front of your house, and that also didn't change in the past 20 years. This area almost looks the same like it did 20 years ago. Here on the left we still see those garages that we can also see in the film, including a lantern. The tree on the left has become much thicker over the past 20 years. Looks a bit weird, doesn't it? It almost looks like it's split in two or something. What is definitely not here is the no parking sign that we can see in the film. It also looks a bit strange in the movie, right? It doesn't really look like a real traffic sign, so I'm pretty sure they just put it here for the movie. Shaun and Ed come up with a plan. They plan to run into the Cunningham house with Shaun's mother and then rescue Liz. This is how it is shown over and over again in the movie. Yeah, and the scene was filmed right over here. And we can see, again, yes, the Cunningham house needs a little cleaning here and there. That white canopy there looks quite dirty. The door on the right looks different. In the movie it was still nice and green. And this house now also has a bike rack on the left side, which obviously didn't exist back then 20 years ago. Shaun stands sadly in the rain after being dumped by Liz. That was filmed from over here. In this scene, Shaun tries to kill several zombies at once. That scene was filmed from this perspective. And here too we can see quite well in the background everything we see in the film is still there today. All these garages and little paths, nothing has changed here at all. Then Ed races through the streets in Phil's Jaguar and the group gets out to save Liz. That was filmed from over here. And this is the final scene of this plot. The group leaves the residential area in the Jaguar. The zombies are watching the scene. And all of that was filmed from over here. Okay, now it's time to rescue Barbara, Shaun's mother, and, well, also his stepfather Philip. And they both live in this small half-timbered house right behind me. And here they are once again, our two cheerful zombie hunters with the cheerful Barbara in tow. Yeah, and this is what Barbara's house looks like today in reality. The forecourt that we can always see in the film looks quite big in the movie, thanks to those wide-angle shots, but in reality it isn't. It's quite tiny, there's only enough room for 2 cars. And what we can also see in this scene, Barbara and Philip's house has changed a little bit. The house itself in this half-timbered style still looks quite similar, but what is no longer here is this garage on the right where Phil apparently parked his Jaguar. Today this little building obviously has been converted into an apartment or something, or a room. There is no garage door anymore, but a large window front. Here we can see Ed, who just wrecked the car, and I think only because he wanted to drive the Jaguar. What an idiot, right? Yeah, that was filmed from over here. A lot of things about this scene are a bit strange. First of all, if a car hits a street sign like that, Shouldn't the street sign break instead of the car? Look how shredded that car looks. And apart from that, what kind of street sign is that anyway? Why is there some kind of an attention sign in a tranquil living area? And what does this street sign want to tell us? Attention, there is a road here, or attention, there are white zombies here, or be careful, there is an absolute idiot driving around here in a red car. And yeah, of course, in reality, there is no street sign here at this corner. They just put it here for the film. Anyway, the area around the shredded car still looks pretty much the same as it did 20 years ago. There is a large high-rise building here in the background that we can see here in reality. Maybe this building wasn't here back then 20 years ago. Maybe it's also just the perspective, but I suspect that this is a new building that was built in the past 20 years. In this scene we can see Shaun fighting the zombies in front of Barbara's house. That was filmed from over here, because in the background we can see this half-timbered building. By the way, this entire residential area consists of these black and white houses. Looks really nice. So Barbara and Philip really lived in a rather upscale residential area back then. Ed backs up the Jaguar, pulls out of Phil's and Barbara's driveway and onto this street. That was filmed from over here. And then the zombies once again watch the group speed away in the car. That was filmed from over here.
This is a Northern Line train.
There is one last shooting location I'd like to show you today, which is also the most important one. It's of course Shaun and Ed's favorite pub, the Winchester. And here it is, the legendary pub, the Winchester from Shaun of the Dead. And unfortunately I have to disappoint you. This is what the Winchester looks like today, 20 years later. The building itself is still here. However, when the movie was shot, this building had a small round porch in front of it. A porch that used to house this famous pub, and it no longer exists today. I was just talking to a local resident in front of this house who passed here, and she told me, in fact, there used to be a real pub in this house. So that wasn't invented for the film or anything like that. There really was a small corner bar here where a lot of people from this residential area went back then. At some point, however, this pub closed, and then they obviously tore down this porch in front of this house. Today there are obviously apartments in this building, at least that's what it looks like. This is the reverse shot of the whole scene. If you may remember it, the group around Shaun and Ed and Barbara fights their way through the backyards to get to the Winchester. And the group then comes out of this park that you can see here in the background. And this park obviously didn't exist in this form 20 years ago. It looks a bit like a construction site to me in the movie. Yeah, today it looks a bit different. There is a paved path, behind it a large green meadow, lots of trees which you could already see in the film. Yeah, obviously a bit of renovation has been done here over the years. In this scene we have another good view of this residential area here. Here we can see all the houses in the background still exist today. There's an electricity pylon, there's also a building in the background with a big chimney. All of that was already here back then. Only on the left side we can now clearly see what has changed on the Winchester building. Yeah, this complete round porch is simply missing. It's no longer here today. Here's the scene again from this perspective. We can see Barbara once again, slightly confused and slightly frightened. She walks towards the Winchester with the group, and here we can see in the background this facade of this green building is now red, and the door to the left is no longer white but dark gray. Shaun then stands on a windowsill at the Winchester, right? And then he tries to lure the zombies away from the pub. Yeah, it must have been filmed from here somehow. The front of the Winchester no longer here, so you can no longer stand on the windowsill. But that white building that we can see in the background in the movie scene is still here. However, today it has a gray or dark pink color. And now let's jump a bit back in the plot of the film to the beginning of the film. We remember Liz, more or less, breaks up with Shaun and he walks to the Winchester completely upset to talk to Ed. And before he meets Ed, he walks past this wall over here. And here we can see quite good what has changed here. This obviously used to be the entrance of the Winchester that we can see in the movie scene. Today they made a window out of it and you can't go in there anymore. There's also a big fence in front of it, but we can still clearly see that this was exactly the place because we can still see parts of the house facade. It has a small bulge over here. Here we see the phone booth in front of the Winchester, where I think the zombie man later rips off his lover's head. Or the other way around, I don't really remember. There is definitely no telephone booth here anymore today. And it's also not entirely clear if there really was a phone booth here at that time. Were telephone booths still a thing in 2004? I think I had my first cell phone around 2003 or 2004, and I was a quite late bloomer with that. Well, today, 20 years later, telephone booths are definitely no longer a thing, and that is perhaps also the reason why it was dismantled here. And this is the legendary scene where Shaun and Ed walk past the Winchester, totally drunk, and they meet the very first zombie, who then sings along with them. Here we can see quite clearly the lantern on the right is still here, the street in the background also still exists. Unfortunately, the Winchester didn't survive. And in this scene we finally see the singing zombie. This is also the last scene I want to show you today. And here we can see that something obviously has changed on this street. In the film it almost looks to me like a traffic calmed zone or something like that. It looks a bit different, and what also didn't exist back then is this house we can see here in reality on the left side of the road. You can still see that on Google Street View. They built this house in the past few years, so the street definitely has changed a little bit. Anyway, I found it, and I would say that's also the end of our shooting location tour for today. It was very exciting and much fun, and I wasn't even bitten by a zombie today. At least, I think so. So, here we are back in the warm hotel. That was my shooting location tour of Shaun of the Dead. I hope you liked it. If you did, please leave a thumbs up. You can also hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you won't miss any upcoming video. And if you like to support me and my work, you can also do that, for example, on Patreon, or you can become a channel member on my YouTube channel. Then you will also get exclusive stuff, for example, all the addresses of the places I showed you today, and new videos before everyone else, so you should check that out. So, that's it for today. I'm back in 2 weeks. I hope you're looking forward to that. If you do, subscribe, and we see each other back in 2 weeks. Have a safe journey, and see you next time.